Hey, I'm Pastor Robert. Welcome to Riverside Friends Church. I am sick again. Got another cold. So I'm going to preach through this, but please forgive my coughing. Okay. I want to talk about a major problem I see in our culture and society today. And it's that we're often a paranoid people prone to anti intellectualism. Here's what I mean by that: that we are often on the lookout for enemies, often of our own making, and we can be paranoid about experts or people claiming expertise and attribute to them motivations that they haven't given or don't have. And when it's done really poorly, what happens is my ignorance is viewed just as valid as your expertise. That I view my ignorance as just as valid as your expertise. At worst, when this happens really poorly, an aversion to learning becomes a badge of honor, that people start to look for alternative means. Have you ever met somebody who is proud that they didn't go to college? Ever met somebody who is proud they didn't go to college? They're not proud that they got into a trade. They're proud that they didn't go to college. At its worst, it's not pro trade. I think trades are great. We need trades. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are so proud they didn't go to college. It's not that they're pro trade, they're anti learning. They see their ignorance as more valid than someone's expertise earned through school and hard work. And paranoia comes in as a distrust for the educated, that they are part of the system, whatever that means. There's always a system that has a hidden agenda that these people have uncovered. And teachers, we see this in a couple of different spaces. We see this in like education and in healthcare. Teachers are out to indoctrinate your kids into their worldly ideologies, when in reality, teachers are just as likely to be Christians as anybody else. And we see this in like healthcare, where it's like, oh, the medical institution isn't trying to cure diseases, they're trying to keep you sick so that way they can make money or something. It's not true. Ask Sarah. Ask Sarah. And so there's this growing problem in our society that distrusts institutions and ascribes paranoid-induced agendas to them. And when we meet good Christian educators in the public school system like Garen, or we meet good Christian healthcare workers like Sarah or the doctors she worked with, instead of rethinking our thoughts on the system, instead we end up saying things like, they're one of the good ones. What we should be doing is we should be rethinking, oh, maybe I'm wrong about this. Instead, we say, no, they're just one of the good ones. The system is still broken. They're just one of the good ones in it. Whatever. And the Bible has a word. The Bible has a word for people who, in light of new evidence, refuses to consider new information. Because when you're exposed to like teachers like Garen, who are good, solid, Christian, public educators, and you still go, ooh, I gotta distrust the public education system. They're trying to indoctrinate our kids. The Bible has a word for that. It's fools. The Bible calls people like that fools. We're beginning a 16-week look at wisdom literature. And there are these two types of people. There are people who are wise, and there are fools. That's the two words that get used here: fools and people who are wise. So we're beginning a 16-week look at wisdom literature. And we have to talk about how foolish we can be as people, because we are often wrong about a lot of things. Because imagine this. Imagine how dumb the average person is. Then half of the population around you is dumber than that. So today, I'm going to give an introduction to wisdom literature. And the Bible has strong things to say about wisdom. It has a whole section devoted to wisdom. Wisdom is a main concept in the Bible that we have to understand and wrestle with. And so this sermon is a 250,000 foot look at wisdom. We're going to cover 3 books of the Bible. We're going to go and just give big overview. But to start with, we need to start by having this like introduction to what is wisdom and what is foolishness. Okay, so we're going to look at Proverbs. We're going to begin Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1 to 7. To look at what does the Bible say about wisdom. So Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1 to 7 says the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right, just, and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So wisdom literature exists to gain wisdom, instruction, understanding. Verse 5 says, let the wise learn and the discerning acquire skills. There's a researcher at Columbia University named Carol Dweck. She's spent the last 25 years studying success. What makes successful people successful? And she has identified one thing above everything else that will help you be successful. And wouldn't you know it, it aligns with our scriptures on wisdom. So Carol Dweck has found that there are two mindsets that people have: a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. So a fixed mindset believes that ability is fixed. A fixed mindset believes that there are like innate things about us, our moral character, our intelligence, our artistic talent, our sport ability, our business acumen, that those things are fixed. That you only have so much of those. And these people often try to like prove themselves by avoiding failure. You don't want to fail, and so since you only have a fixed amount of intelligence, you better start showing it right away. On the opposite side of that is like a growth mindset. In a growth mindset, we don't know how much like moral character, intelligence, talent, or skill a person has, or how much they might develop through years of passion, toil, and training. That these are things that can be grown in a person. So Dweck measured fixed versus growth mindset by giving people, in particular, she did a lot of this with elementary age kids initially, gave them puzzles to solve. And after completing an easy puzzle, the fixed mindset people, they didn't want to try a harder one. The growth mindset people always wanted to try a harder one. And when given a harder puzzle, the growth mindset people continued to try to solve it, even when it was impossible to solve, because she eventually got to this point where she's given them impossible puzzles, they were still trying to solve it. Dweck had created a puzzle that was incredibly difficult, but not impossible, to see what would happen when she gave it to fifth graders. And Dweck offered to give the puzzle to any of the students as they were leaving, because none of them solved it. But she said, hey, you can take this home with you if you want. She'd created this. She said, why don't you take it home? You can practice. And one fixed mindset kid said, my mom already has that one. And the growth mindset kids generally took the puzzles. Like, this kid just made up this story that his mom had one so that he didn't have to take it home and try with it. He wanted to appear to be smart without actually having to like work towards it. So one of the key differences between the two is that growth mindset people crave learning for learning's sake, while fixed mindset people want to show that they're already intelligent. When put in a functional MRI machine, it shows like parts of your brain firing and lighting up, and you can tell like how much the brain is working based off of how much of it's being lit up at one time and what parts are being lit up. One of the things that they found is that with fixed mindset people, they were interested, like when they were told if they got a question right or wrong, their brains would like light up. But for a growth mindset people, they were more interested in learning new information. When they heard something new, their brains just went and lit up. And so fixed mindset people wanted to get the question right. They wanted to know, did I get this right or wrong? Growth mindset people wanted to know, what can I learn out of this? And this is, I think, like this is modern language and tools that we can use to understand this ancient idea of wisdom. Because our verses today say that fools despise wisdom and instruction. That's the nature of a fixed mindset. They want to know, did I get this right or wrong? They don't want to know, what can I learn out of this? And I think that's the nature of that fixed mindset and anti-intellectualism. They want to be right, and they want to challenge the system that's there without having to really engage the system. They want there to be an underground conspiracy that says, oh, well, this is the reason. And they're the ones that are privy to this secret knowledge that they have and that they've acquired without actually having to do the hard work of building expertise. And our verse today says, fools despise wisdom and instruction. This is a major problem that I see in our society, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. To begin to understand wisdom, we first have to have a learning mindset that says, ooh, I want to know more about this. I want to grow in this. I want to be better at this. And so for the rest of the sermon, I'm going to show how wisdom literature is related to a growth mindset. And this will set the stage for the rest of our sermons for the next 15 weeks on wisdom literature. Because part of a growth mindset is a desire to learn and grow. So to begin to receive wisdom, we have to have the wisdom to want it. To begin to receive wisdom, we have to have the wisdom to want it. So let me demonstrate this for you. Because if we approach the scriptures with a fixed mindset, we will come to a position that says, take the words literally, apply them, they're fixed. And that's what's going to happen. If we approach scripture and say, oh, if I just know what it says and do it, then I'll be fine. That's a very fixed mindset. So Proverbs 26:4 says, do not answer fools according to their folly, or you will be a fool yourself. So if you don't want to be a fool, right? Then don't answer a fool according to their folly. That seems really straightforward. We have an idiom like this today in America. George Bernard Shaw wrote, don't wrestle with pigs because you both get filthy and the pig likes it. It's the same meaning. And so, like, according to this verse, don't mess with fools, don't answer them, and then you won't be a fool. Pretty straightforward, right? The next verse, the very next verse, Proverbs 26:5 says, answer a fool according to their folly, or they will be wise in their own eyes. So if we have a straightforward reading of these verses, we will end up confused. Don't answer a fool according to their follies, or you'll be a fool. Answer a fool according to their folly, or they'll be wise in their own eyes. What do we do now? Wisdom. Wisdom is how we know how to answer a fool. When we are wise, we know how to answer. We know when to answer a fool in his folly without falling into the pig pen ourselves, while doing so in a way that the fool isn't allowed to go on being wise in their own eyes. So how do we get that wisdom? How do we get that wisdom? The book of Proverbs is an introduction to wisdom. We're going to spend the next 5 weeks looking at the book of Proverbs. We can't teach you to be in 16 weeks, I can't teach you to be wise. Nobody can. We're not going to go through every proverb in the next 5 weeks as we go through Proverbs. Evan next week is going to lay the foundation of Proverbs. This week I'm laying the foundation for wisdom literature. Proverbs, as Evan will cover next week, is the basic wisdom knowledge. It was taught to children as short, pithy statements. Proverbs 1:4 says, Proverbs was written to teach shrewdness to the simple, knowledge and prudence to the young. So these statements they're answers about how the world works to children. They were likely orally given and then later written down. And so these statements on how to answer a fool are part of that knowledge of that is taught to children. So here's what we've seen so far. Our society is often anti-intellectual and paranoid of experts, and that has caused a distinct lack of wisdom. People of every age and demographic are getting worse at critical thinking. Intellectuals who are good at critical thinking, who are often good at critical thinking, are often portrayed as being smart Alex or as being too smart. And our world is going to suffer and continue to be worse and worse at wisdom the longer this goes on. And the mindset that we have will impact our ability to learn wisdom. Because if we have a fixed mindset that our intelligence, our moral character, our wisdom is fixed, we are hopeless. We are hopeless. Proverbs 26:12 says, "Do you see persons wise in their own eyes? There is more hope for fools than for them." That if we are wise in our own eyes, there is little hope for us. So we have to have this growth mindset that accepts and embraces challenges with an openness to grow and try new things. And that's the mindset that we approach wisdom literature with. So what is wisdom literature? There are 3 books. There are 3 books in wisdom literature, kind of 4. The 3 books in wisdom literature are Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, and some Psalms. That's why I say kind of 4. Not all Psalms, but some Psalms. So briefly, I'm going to give you an overview of all 3, because we've already kind of really talked about Proverbs. And, next week, Evan is going to really dive into Proverbs and give a big overview for what is wisdom and Proverbs and this idea. And we're going to take a week to go over each of these books, to go over Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes, as though we're flying over an airplane. So that's like that 30,000-foot level. But today, I want to give you just a quick snapshot from like 250,000-foot level of Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes. And I want to do it in just a couple of minutes to kind of lay out, okay, what does Proverbs say? How does Job respond? How does Ecclesiastes respond? And I want to do that in just a couple of minutes. So get ready, buckle up. Proverbs is the introduction to wisdom. It was the first oral statements that were collected and written down, and these allowed children to orient their lives. Wisdom is intellectual. Wisdom is always intellectual. It is the knowledge gleaned from watching how the world works, meaning it's observant of the normal world and sees how each mundane matter is infused with ethical significance. So the promise of Proverbs is that if you live upright and follow God, turn from evil, good things will happen. That's what Proverbs 3:7 says. It says, if live upright, follow God, turn from evil, good things will happen to you. And those who are blameless and upright are scheduled for peace and prosperity. This is the foundation for like the prosperity gospel, a wicked idolatry that says if you follow God or upright blameless, then God will give you lots of money. It's a lie. It's a lie grounded in Proverbs and the Psalms. But it's nonetheless a lie. It misunderstands wisdom. Psalms 37 gives the best understanding of how wisdom is meant to work. This is Psalms 37, verse 25 to 28. It says, I was young and now I'm old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread. They are always generous and lend freely. Their children will be a blessing. Turn from evil, do good. Then you will dwell in the land forever. For the Lord loves the just and will not forsake his faithful ones. Wrongdoers will be completely destroyed. The offspring of the wicked will perish. So this is the 250,000-foot level of wisdom. Proverbs says, try it. It works. It will go well for you. If you do this, it will go well for you. Try it is works. This is what's called theotic settlement. Theotic settlement. If you do this, God will do that. Proverbs is deep and provides this wisdom, but it's like wisdom for children. It's the idea that this is settled. If you do it, it'll work. If you do this, then that will happen. It's like telling a child, do well in school and your life will turn out well. Yeah, probably, but not always. We all know people who did well in school and life dealt them a bad hand. We also probably know jerks and bullies that we went to school with who went on to do really well in life. And that's where Job steps in. Because Proverbs says, try this, it works. And Job says, I did, it doesn't. Because who was Job? Job 1:1 says, there once was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Job is a direct quotation from Proverbs 3:7. What is supposed to happen to Job? Job is supposed to receive all of the blessings. Job was blameless and upright. He feared God and turned from evil. Theodic settlement says Job should be blessed, and he was. Job begins by saying he has more sheep, camel, oxen, donkeys, and servants than he knows what to do with. His family is amazing. He's got all these sons and daughters. They get along. They all get along. They eat meals together regularly. And Job thanked God for all of it. And the story of Job begins exactly how Proverbs said it would. And yet, in the cosmic background, unknown to Job, the adversary is plotting. Job loses everything. His children are killed, his flocks are destroyed or stolen, he loses his health, he's covered in sores from the top of his head to the bottom of his foot, and in the literal ashes of his ruined family, he sits down and takes a broken pot and itches his skin because it's broken out in these sores, and still, he refuses to curse God. In Job, theodic settlement becomes theodic protest. Because Job's friends, he's got these 3 friends that come to him, and they try to convince him, Job, you must have done something wrong, otherwise this wouldn't happen to you. Their position is that Job suffers, so he must have sinned. And they speak and quote Proverbs, and Job protests his innocence. And Job is innocent. And his friends are wrong. And Job says, show me where I sinned and I'll repent. And they can't. And eventually, God comes and speaks to Job. But he doesn't answer the question. He doesn't answer the question about what did Job do wrong. God answers with a power display. God does not even dispute that Job is innocent. The book says Job is. God says the question of innocent or guilt, though, is not the defining question of creation or wisdom. The defining question of creation, according to the Creator in Job, is who is sovereign? That question doesn't help Job. It leaves the question of justice unanswered, and it does so on purpose. Job is innocent and never receives an answer. And when we are the victims of injustice, answers will elude us also. But Job continues. Job continues to be upright and blameless, and he receives twice as much as before. All of his cattle and his barns and his sheep and his oxen, they're restored. He gets twice as many of them. But the question still remains, what now? Now that we know that Proverbs won't always work, what now? See, the issue with Proverbs is it reduces the world to morality. If moral, then blessing. And we can't reduce our world to morality. That's Job's response. Because while Proverbs tries to say, do this, it works, Job says, I did, it doesn't. We can't reduce our world to morality. While we can try to live morally, we can't reduce our world to morality. And so we return to Proverbs, but without the naive innocence, as though it will always work. While Job receives back children, they're not his original children. And there's a sadness that has to be felt in this story, because we cannot undo the loss of innocence. Moral certitude and theodic settlement died with the children of Job. Proverbs says, try this, it works. And Job cries out, I did, it doesn't. And now we return back to Solomon, not in his Proverbs, but in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes takes the same position as Job. The teacher, the author of Ecclesiastes, looks at the world through the lens of Proverbs and sees that fools and the wise, they all end up the same. Ecclesiastes 2:14-15 says, the wise have eyes in their head, but fools walk in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same fate befalls all of them. And then I said to myself, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so wise? And I said to myself, this is also vanity. So Ecclesiastes sees all of the trials and advancements of life as vanity. And vanity can also be translated as vapor. like dew that melts away with the sun. All of these advancements are just going to vanish. See, Job puts up a fight and he protests his innocence. Ecclesiastes has no fight left. In Ecclesiastes, everything is beyond reach. It's all fading away. Ecclesiastes is the heart meeting the head when the teacher can't make sense of the world around him and the proverbs that he grew up with. He can't reconcile those. He sees sinful people doing wrong and succeeding. And in his head, he maintains a sense of eternity, but it doesn't quite work. See, Job rightly protests his innocence based on the old system. Job says, according to that old system, I'm innocent. But Ecclesiastes questions the old system outright. It provides candor in an absurd time. As Ecclesiastes tells tradition, everything must be rethought and reformulated, not toward resignation, but towards God's sovereignty. When things don't make sense, Ecclesiastes says, of course they don't. The world has changed. The world is different. The world that these were written in no longer exists. We have something different now, and it has to be rethought and reformulated. So Proverbs says, try this, it works. And Job says, I did, it doesn't. And Ecclesiastes says, the world is different, it doesn't work now. That's the overview of the book of wisdom, the books of wisdom. And now I need to land this plane somehow. So I got to finish this sermon. Our first verses said, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The wisdom of Proverbs generally works, but not always. And what we will see here is that the point of wisdom is not to be wise so that we can gain things and stuff, but to understand the sovereignty of God. We are wise and we enter into wisdom so that we can understand God's sovereignty. And if we don't understand that, we will be foolish. If we approach wisdom with a thought, it will make my life easier, we've misunderstood. Wisdom properly situated is about knowing God's sovereignty, that he is powerful over the world. And our world is not guided by morality, but God, who is the moral authority. So we're going to spend the next 15 weeks going over Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. The fixed mindset will tell us that knowing the Proverbs will show us how to live our lives, and then it'll all work out. But having a growth mindset will allow us to approach all of the books with wisdom so that through it we can see the sovereignty of God. Things generally work out well for good people, but not always. And things generally don't work if you're a fool, but not always. And we will need a growth mindset so that we can lean into our own growth and be challenged by difficult texts. The more we can learn to embrace the difficult parts of our faith, the more we will learn to trust in the sovereignty of God. Proverbs says, try this, it works. And it generally does. Job and Ecclesiastes say, we tried it, it doesn't. And no matter where you're at on that whether you're closer to Proverbs or closer to Job or closer to the teacher in Ecclesiastes, doesn't matter. I'm glad you're here. Because we're at this junction where we want to learn about wisdom to see God. And it doesn't matter where you're at. If you're in Proverbs where we're trying it and it's working, if you're Job where you're going, I've tried it and now my life's even worse, or you're in Ecclesiastes and you're ready to go, I'm ready to throw the whole thing away. Doesn't matter where you're at in that. Because the purpose of wisdom is to see God, not to be rich. And so God is sovereign. That's the point. And we recognize that he's sovereign even when our world doesn't make sense. And today we're invited into a space where the world doesn't make sense any longer. But we recognize that God is in control. And we celebrate his control. That's what we do.